US President Donald Trump is attacking his closest allies, threatening to slap them with tariffs. He's counting on the fact that they need the US. But do they? And what retaliatory strategies are they already considering? I'm Eli Stokols. I cover the White House and foreign affairs at Politico. Along with colleagues all across Europe, we have been covering the possible responses from the world to a much more aggressive American administration. Just months ago, no one would have ever been thinking about how to make the US feel some pain. Just wasn't on the table, but it is now. So there's government responses, and then there's private sector responses and public consumer responses. On the defense side, the biggest question for Europe is really America's reliability. He's threatened Europe with essentially walking away from NATO if countries don't pay more of their GDP toward defense. So when Donald Trump says spend more on defense, Europe says yes, but there's also an awareness. Our reporting says for people in Europe, they're saying, in the first term, we thought we could appease Donald Trump by doing deals, sending more money to the United States. That no longer seems to be the case because countries that have done everything that the US wanted have still drawn Trump's ire. Poland is by far spending more on defense than any other NATO member. They are right on Putin's doorstep. They have continued to buy a ton of defensive equipment, material, weapons from the United States. We're talking around $30 billion a year. Poland is not in the doghouse.
Happy birthday to you. May all your dreams come true, Mr. President.
And yet, in Poland, the leaders are rethinking how much they can rely on the United States. Our reporter in Poland noticed that for the first time that they could ever remember, there were posters across Warsaw linking Putin and Trump, sort of culturally and publicly, to be suddenly seeing signs of anti-American sentiment in Poland, a place that has been as pro-American as any country in Europe. That is a sign that even though the government is not in a position to jeopardize its relationship with the United States, that public opinion, if it's changing in Poland, it's changing fast all across Europe. And I think that is largely in response to the way Trump has tried to use American weapon system as leverage over Ukraine. And there were questions in Poland and in other places across Europe about whether it makes sense to continue buying F-35s. If they get mad at us, can they deny us the equipment that we need to repair these planes? Can they deny us the technological updates that we need to keep flying these planes? Europe does have other options. France builds fighter jets. There's also an anti-missile defense system that the Europeans have made. That is now being seen as a replacement for Patriot missile defense systems. The procurement time can vary, the delivery time can vary, but Europe is also trying to build these things faster to lessen the reliability on Washington. Ultimately, it will be harder for the US to get the Europeans to do the things that American governments want them to do, whether that's helping contain China economically or whether that's responding, militarily, joining an alliance in the event of an actual hot war somewhere, perhaps in Taiwan or some other part of the Eastern Europe. For the entirety of American history, we have depended on allies. NATO is an organization that was formed after World War II. And the central article in the Charter, Article 5, dictates that an attack on one country is an attack on all. And so with Europe and the United States being aligned, there's been peace for 8 decades because nobody has wanted to test Article 5, with the exception of 9/11. And NATO allies responded and fought alongside the United States. The other reason that alliances are important, when the US military decides that it needs to carry out an operation, say in the Middle East, a lot of those troops, the people who are actually flying the planes, dropping the bombs, manning the drones, those people are based out of Europe. They're based in other countries, in other parts of the world, and those forward operating bases allow a faster response. And so having countries willing to have an American military presence on the ground helps not just American security, but global security. If the defense relationship deteriorates and Europe decides that they can't rely on America to defend them if they're attacked, then that also impacts the economic relationship. Technology is another area where Europe has realized sort of an over-reliance on American technology, American companies. The EU has passed a lot of digital services regulations trying to rein in some of these companies, and if American companies like X, for example, are not willing to abide by the EU's laws, they could see themselves banned. The Dutch, they've approved funding to build a lot of tech infrastructure that is Dutch. There are always concerns about the sensitivity or security of data wherever it goes, but I think there's new concerns because that data is in the hands of American companies. Beyond what governments are doing, we're seeing anti-US sentiment across Europe and Canada and other parts of the world rise in pretty stunning ways. There is real frustration with a lot of the titans of American tech aligning themselves so closely with this administration, this president. And so do consumers decide that I don't really need my X account or my Meta account anymore, or I don't really need to buy this on Amazon, I can find it somewhere else. Suddenly you have people just no longer wanting to buy American products. Things like Florida orange juice or bourbon from Kentucky, things specifically American and from Republican or red states in particular. There's far fewer sales of Teslas happening across Europe. There's also an impact potentially on tourism. A lot of Europeans like traveling to the United States, especially in the summer months. It's not just the tariffs, but it's also concerns about visas and immigration. And is the United States going to allow certain people in? Are they going to hassle you at the border? All of these things have a negative effect on tourism and on commerce, really, because these are hurting the economic relationship on both sides of the Atlantic. So Europe is considering ways to make the American public feel the pain if this trade war continues. Export tariffs are something that the EU has discussed. It's kind of middle ground between the initial round of counter tariffs and going nuclear, so to speak, with the anti-coercion instrument that the EU established in 2023. It would basically start a long process that sets out how Europe would retaliate to tariffs. It starts by establishing a mechanism for conversations. It can go up to counter tariffs. It can take away intellectual property protections for American products in Europe. All kinds of things that are aimed at forcing the U.S. to stand down in a trade war. It was conceived to protect against economic coercion by China, but it struck us as just remarkable that in European capitals, people were even talking about this as something that could be deployed against the U.S. One thing that has really unnerved allies is the imperialist ambitions that Trump has expressed, talking about Greenland and annexing Canada. Canada has a huge trading relationship with the United States. Oil, number one importer of crude oil coming from Alberta to the United States. Cars, automobiles are, there's a piece manufactured in this country, a piece manufactured in that country, put together in the United States. There's also Canadian timber. American construction industry gets a ton of lumber from Canada. If the trade war continues, house construction is going to get much, much more expensive, and that is going to have a big impact. There are a number of northern states in the Great Lakes region and in New England that rely heavily on energy from Canada powering their grid. And the Canadian government has talked about shutting off the electricity. And so that is a really punitive measure that Canadians would probably never have been considering until you have an American president imposing high tariffs and talking about annexation. Foreign policy observers are definitely noticing that, in the aggregate, alienating allies runs the risk of putting it on a platter for China to make inroads with longtime U.S. allies. And so we've seen the leader of Spain travel to Beijing to meet with Xi Jinping, and we may see more of that. At some point, if America forces Europe to choose and makes the relationship with Washington sort of prohibitive, then that is a natural place for those countries to go. The future is really in more doubt than ever. I think people see in Trump 2.0 a person who is even more willing to actually push the button. And we've seen the entire world economy convulse as a result of Trump's zigging and zagging on trade. Allies realize there is a long way to go, and they're really bracing for more shocks.